The morning sun cast long shadows across Riverside Park, painting the weathered playground equipment in shades of amber and gold. Thomas Whitmore arrived at 6:30 a.m., just as he had every single day for the past 23 years. His truck pulled into the gravel parking lot with a familiar crunch, and he stepped out slowly, his 72-year-old joints protesting the early hour. In his hands, he carried a worn toolbox that had seen better days, its red paint chipped and faded to a dusty pink. The handle was wrapped in electrical tape where the metal had worn through, but Thomas had never replaced it. Some things, he believed, were meant to stay broken in just the right way. The playground was silent except for the morning birds and the soft creaking of the swings moving in the breeze. There were 6 swings in total, hanging from a sturdy metal frame that Thomas had repainted more times than he could count. But only one swing mattered to him, the third from the left, with the blue seat that he replaced every 2 years without fail. Thomas set his toolbox down on the mulch and ran his weathered hand along the chain of that special swing. The metal was cool to the touch, damp with morning dew. He checked each link carefully, looking for signs of rust or weakness, just as he always did. Then he sat on the nearby bench, pulled out a rag, and began to polish the swing seat until it gleamed. "Morning, sweetheart," he whispered to the empty air. "Beautiful day today." The park would come alive in a few hours. Mothers would arrive with their toddlers, older children would race across the monkey bars, and teenagers would lounge on the benches, pretending they were too cool for playgrounds while secretly enjoying them. But for now, in these quiet morning hours, the park belonged only to Thomas and his memories. He moved through his routine with practiced precision. He checked every piece of equipment, the slide, the merry-go-round, the climbing structure, making sure everything was safe and secure. He picked up any litter that had accumulated overnight, swept the walkways, and raked the mulch back into place where it had been scattered. He oiled the squeaking hinges on the gate and tightened the bolts on the seesaw. The work was never dramatic or difficult, but it was constant. Thomas made sure of that. This park would never fall into disrepair, not on his watch. Not while he still had breath in his lungs. By 8 a.m., he was trimming the hedges that bordered the playground when he heard the first arrivals of the day, a young mother with twin girls who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. They bounded toward the swings with the unbridled enthusiasm that only children possess, their laughter filling the air like music. Thomas smiled and waved. The mother waved back, grateful as always for the immaculate condition of the park. She had no idea who maintained it, assuming it was the city's responsibility. Most people did. One of the twins headed straight for the blue swing, the third from the left. Thomas's heart clenched, but he kept smiling. He watched as the little girl settled into the seat, her tiny hands gripping the chains. "Higher, Mommy." "Higher," she squealed as her mother pushed her gently. Thomas turned away, his eyes suddenly burning. Even after all these years, it never got easier. But he never stopped either. He couldn't. 23 years ago, this playground hadn't existed. In its place had been an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and littered with debris. The neighborhood had been different then, rougher around the edges, struggling with poverty and neglect. Thomas had lived in a small house just 2 blocks away with his wife, Margaret, and their 7-year-old daughter, Emily. Emily had been their miracle. After years of trying and multiple heartbreaks, she had arrived like a burst of sunshine into their lives. She had Margaret's dark curls and Thomas's green eyes, and a spirit so bright it could chase away any shadow. She loved to sing. Her voice would drift through their little house at all hours, while she brushed her teeth, while she did her homework, while she helped Margaret in the kitchen. She made up songs about everything: the cat, the mailman, the flowers in their tiny garden, the clouds in the sky. And she loved to swing. More than anything else in the world, Emily loved to swing. "Daddy, when I swing really high, I feel like I can fly," she had told him once, her face flushed with joy. "Like I could just let go and soar right up to the clouds." Thomas had laughed and told her to hold on tight. "Maybe save the flying for when you're older, sweetheart." Thomas had examined the tire skeptically. It was ancient, the rubber cracked and weathered. But Emily's enthusiasm was infectious. He found a sturdy-looking tree at the edge of the lot, and, using rope from their garage, he fashioned a simple tire swing. It wasn't fancy. The tree branch was low, so Emily couldn't swing very high. The tire spun and wobbled. But Emily's laughter as she swung back and forth made it the most beautiful thing Thomas had ever created. "This is the best day ever," she had declared, her voice full of pure, uncomplicated joy. For the next 2 weeks, that tire swing became Emily's favorite place in the world. Every evening after dinner, she would beg to go to the lot. Thomas would push her on the swing while Margaret sat on their blanket, reading a book in the fading daylight. It became their routine, their family time, their little oasis in the struggle of daily life. Thomas had even started to dream bigger. He thought about maybe fixing up the lot properly, building a real playground. It would take time and money they didn't have, but maybe he could do it gradually. A slide 1 month, a climbing structure the next. He wanted to give Emily and all the kids in the neighborhood a real place to play. It happened on a Wednesday. Thomas was at his second job, working the evening shift at the warehouse. Margaret was at the grocery store, her shift running late because someone had called in sick. Emily was with their neighbor, Mrs. Chin, who watched her for a few dollars when their schedules overlapped. Mrs. Chin was a kind woman, but she was 76 years old and sometimes dozed off in her chair. Emily knew not to leave the house without permission. She was a good girl, an obedient girl. But she was also 7 years old. The tire swing called to her. She could see the lot from Mrs. Chen's window. Just a few minutes, she must have thought. Just a quick swing before Mommy and Daddy got home. She would be back before Mrs. Chen even woke up. She slipped out the back door into the golden evening light. The tree branch was old. Thomas had noticed it was deadwood but hadn't thought much of it. The rope was cheap. He had meant to replace it with something stronger, but hadn't gotten around to it. These small oversights, these tiny moments of "I'll do it later," these would haunt Thomas for the rest of his life. Emily had climbed onto the tire, started to swing. Higher and higher, pumping her legs the way her daddy had taught her. She was singing, Mrs. Chin would later say. The neighbor had heard Emily's voice through the window, that sweet, clear voice singing a made-up song about flying. The branch had cracked with a sound like a gunshot. The rope had snapped. Emily had fallen. Not far, just 6 feet or so. It shouldn't have been enough. But she landed wrong, at a terrible angle, her small head striking the one rock in that entire empty lot, a jagged piece of concrete hidden in the grass. Mrs. Chin found her 12 minutes later, when she woke from her doze and realized Emily was gone. The funeral was held on a Saturday. The same church where Thomas and Margaret had been married, where Emily had been baptized. The small white casket at the front was covered in flowers, daisies and sunflowers, Emily's favorites. Thomas sat in the front pew, holding Margaret's hand, both of them hollow-eyed and silent. The grief was so enormous, so consuming, that there were no tears left. They had cried an ocean in the days before. Now they were just empty. 2 broken people trying to figure out how to keep breathing when their reason for breathing was gone. The guilt was worse than the grief. Thomas replayed those moments endlessly. If he had bought better rope. If he had checked the branch more carefully. If he had taken her to a real playground instead of making do with a dangerous substitute. If he had been home instead of working. If. Margaret didn't blame him. She said so over and over, but Thomas could see it in her eyes, the question she couldn't ask, the one that hung between them like a ghost. Why wasn't it safe? Why didn't you make sure it was safe? He blamed himself enough for both of them. The weeks after the funeral passed in a blur. Margaret moved through the house like a shadow, picking up Emily's toys, washing Emily's clothes, sitting in Emily's room for hours. Thomas worked his jobs mechanically, going through the motions of living without any sense of purpose. Their marriage, already strained by poverty and stress, began to crack under the weight of their grief. They barely spoke. When they did, it was about nothing: the weather, the bills, whether they needed milk from the store. They never spoke about Emily. Her name became a landmine neither dared to step on. 6 months after Emily's death, Margaret left. Not dramatically, not with anger or accusations. She simply packed a bag one morning and said, I can't do this anymore, Thomas. I can't stay in this house, in this neighborhood. Every corner has her in it. I'm drowning. Thomas had nodded. He understood. Part of him wanted to leave too, to run from the memories, to start over somewhere that didn't ache with loss. But he couldn't leave. Because Emily was still here, in a way. Her body was buried in Riverside Cemetery, but her spirit, that bright, joyful, singing spirit, belonged to that lot where she had laughed on a tire swing. He couldn't leave her alone. 1 week after Margaret left, Thomas went back to the empty lot for the first time since the accident. The tire swing was gone. Someone from the city had removed it, along with the police tape. The lot looked exactly as it had before, empty, neglected, forgotten. He stood there for an hour, just stood there, feeling the weight of his failure pressed down on his shoulders. And then, slowly, an idea began to form. He couldn't bring Emily back. He couldn't undo his mistakes. But he could do something. He could make sure that no other child would ever be hurt in a place that should have been safe. He could create the playground he should have built in the first place. Thomas went to the city council meeting the next week. He was just one man, a warehouse worker with no political connections and no wealth, but he spoke from the heart. He told them about Emily, about the need for a safe place for the neighborhood children to play. He didn't mention his own guilt, his own desperate need for redemption, but perhaps they heard it anyway. The council was sympathetic but realistic. There was no budget for a new playground, especially not in this poor neighborhood. Maybe in a few years, they said. Maybe if funding became available. Thomas didn't wait. He emptied his savings account, the money that was supposed to be for emergencies, for a better car, for someday. He bought materials. He taught himself construction from library books. He worked every hour he wasn't at his jobs, clearing the lot, leveling the ground, laying foundations. The neighbors noticed. Some thought he was crazy obsessed. Others understood, or at least tried to. A few volunteered to help, men who worked construction and could show him the right way to do things, teenagers who hauled materials, women who brought him food and water when he forgot to eat. It took him 9 months to build the basic playground structure. A slide, a climbing wall, a set of swings. He built everything to code, triple-checked every bolt, every joint, every surface. And that third swing, the one with the blue seat, that was Emily's swing. He placed it exactly where the tire swing had hung. When he was done, he stood back and looked at his work. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't elaborate. But it was safe. It was solid. It was what he should have given Emily from the beginning. The neighborhood children started coming. Slowly at first, then in waves. Their laughter filled the space where Emily had died, and Thomas found that the sound didn't hurt quite as much as he'd feared. Instead, it felt right. It felt like Emily would have wanted this. So he kept maintaining it. Every single day, he checked the equipment. He fixed anything that broke. He replaced anything that wore out. He made sure the playground was always clean, always safe, always welcoming. The years passed. The city officially designated it as Riverside Park and added more equipment, benches, paths. But Thomas continued his daily routine, claiming no credit, asking nothing in return. To most people, he was just the old man who was always at the playground, a fixture as familiar as the swings themselves. On the 23rd anniversary of Emily's death, Thomas arrived at the park to find something unexpected. Someone had tied blue balloons to Emily's swing, the third from the left. Dozens of them, bobbing in the morning breeze. His hands shook as he approached. Attached to the swing's chain was a laminated poster, protected from the weather. On it was a collage of photographs, children playing on the playground over the years, smiling faces, joyful moments. At the top, in careful lettering, it read, "Thank you to our guardian angel." At the bottom was a longer message. "To the man who has cared for this playground every day for 23 years, we see you. We know you're here before dawn and often after dusk. We know you fix every broken thing and sweep every scattered leaf. We don't know your name, but we know your heart. Because of you, our children play safely. Because of you, this neighborhood has a place of joy. Thank you for giving so much while asking nothing in return. You're our hero." It was signed by dozens of families, names Thomas recognized from over the years, children who had grown into parents and brought their own children to the park. Thomas sank onto the bench, the poster clutched in his weathered hands, and for the first time in 23 years, he wept openly in the morning light. Not tears of guilt or grief, though those were still there. They would always be there. These were different tears, mixed with something he hadn't felt in so long he'd almost forgotten the name for it. Gratitude. Peace. The sense that maybe, just maybe, he had done something right. Did you see, sweetheart? He whispered to the empty air, to the daughter who lived in his heart. Did you see what you've given them? What your swing has become? The breeze picked up, rustling the blue balloons, making them dance and bob as if a child's hand was batting at them. Thomas smiled through his tears. That afternoon, the park filled earlier than usual. Families arrived with more decorations, with flowers, with candles. Word had spread somehow, about the anniversary, about the mysterious caretaker, about the little girl who had died here and the father who had turned tragedy into a gift for an entire community. Thomas tried to slip away, to maintain his anonymity, but they found him. The families surrounded him, not crowding but simply present, respectful. A young woman in her late 20s stepped forward. She was holding the hand of a small girl with pigtails. "Mr. Whitmore?" she asked softly. "I'm Sarah Chen. I was Mrs. Chen's granddaughter. I was there that day. I was 13. I heard the ambulance. I've never forgotten." Thomas looked at her, this woman who had been a teenager when his world fell apart. "I need you to know something," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. "After Emily died, after I saw what happened, I became a pediatric nurse. I dedicated my life to keeping children safe. And I'm not the only one. Do you remember Marcus Johnson? He was a teenager who helped you build this park. He became a playground safety inspector for the state. And Lisa Martinez? She was one of the first kids to play here. She's now a city council member who's built 6 more playgrounds in low-income neighborhoods." She gestured to the crowd around them. "Emily's death was a tragedy, Mr. Whitmore. But what you did with that tragedy, the way you turned your grief into something that protects others, it's rippled out into the world in ways you can't even imagine. You've saved lives, sir. Not just by maintaining this playground, but by showing all of us what it means to love so much that you keep giving even when it hurts." Thomas couldn't speak. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, some he recognized, many he didn't. Young and old, parents and children, all here because of this place. All safe because he had refused to let his guilt paralyze him, had chosen instead to act. The little girl holding Sarah's hand tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, is that the angel man?" Sarah smiled and nodded. "Yes, baby. That's him." The child walked up to Thomas with the fearless confidence of the very young. She looked up at him with wide brown eyes and said, "Thank you for my favorite swing. The blue one is the best." She hugged his legs quickly, then ran off toward the playground, her laughter trailing behind her like music. Thomas watched her go, watched her climb onto the blue swing, Emily's swing, and start to pump her legs, rising higher and higher into the air. And for just a moment, he could almost see another little girl there, with dark curls and green eyes, singing a song about flying. That evening, as the sun set and the last families departed, Thomas sat on his bench for a long time. The blue balloons still bobbed and danced on Emily's swing. Someone had left flowers at the base of the swing set, sunflowers and daisies. He thought about Margaret, who he hadn't seen in 22 years. He wondered if she had found peace, if she had managed to build a life that didn't hurt quite so much. He hoped so. He had failed her as a husband, had let his guilt and obsession consume him, but he had never stopped wishing her happiness. He thought about Emily, about the little girl who had loved to swing and sing and dream of flying. She would have been 30 now. Maybe she would have been a mother herself, bringing her own children to this playground. But she wasn't. She would be forever 7, forever frozen in that golden June evening, forever his little girl. The grief would never fully leave him. The guilt would never completely fade. But standing here, in this place that had been transformed from a site of tragedy into a sanctuary of joy, Thomas felt something shift inside him. Not healing, exactly, some wounds don't heal. But acceptance. Purpose. The understanding that even broken people can create beautiful things. He stood slowly, his old joints protesting. He had one more task to complete before he went home. He pulled out his toolbox and, by the light of the street lamps, he checked every chain on every swing one more time. He tightened every bolt. He swept the walkway. He picked up a few scattered leaves. And then, with the care of someone handling something precious and sacred, he polished the blue seat of the third swing from the left until it gleamed in the lamplight. "Good night, sweetheart," he whispered. "I'll see you in the morning." As he walked to his truck, he heard it, or thought he heard it. A child's voice on the evening breeze, singing a wordless melody. It might have been his imagination, a trick of memory and grief. Or it might have been something more. Thomas smiled and kept walking. Tomorrow he would return, just as he had every day for 23 years. He would check the equipment and sweep the paths and make sure everything was safe. He would watch children play on Emily's swing, and he would be grateful for every single one of them. Because this was his penance and his prayer, his grief and his gift. This playground, this monument to a little girl who had loved to swing, would stand as long as he drew breath. And when he was gone, he hoped someone else would take up the task, would keep the swings swinging and the slides sliding and the children laughing. Emily had loved to swing because it made her feel like she could fly. She never got the chance to soar the way she dreamed. But every child who played safely in this park, every parent who left without their worst fears realized, every life touched by this place, they all carried a piece of Emily's joy forward into the world. And in that way, Thomas thought as he drove away into the deepening dusk, his daughter had learned to fly after all. The morning sun would rise again tomorrow. Thomas Whitmore would arrive at 6:30 a.m., just as he always did. And Emily's swing would be waiting, ready to lift another child toward the sky, ready to hold another dream of flight. Some things, he had learned, were meant to stay broken in just the right way. And some things, through love and time and endless dedication, could be mended into something even more beautiful than they were before.